Her first sweetheart or first husband, they married, and he was killed 3 months later. 3 years later, she married my dad. He was her first sweetheart's best friend. They were sent by the government to live in Smolensk. My mother was a doctor, and that's where she was sent to do her work. And my father was a railway engineer. I was born in 43, so the war was on, but we were a happy little trio. All the young men in the village were taken away, put on a train. Nobody was told why. She knew she'd never see him again. She had an inner knowing. And he said, I shall wave this white piece of cloth until you can't see it anymore. And so she said the train went off, and she kept looking and looking for that speck of white until it disappeared. Soldiers came to her one day to the village and said, you're needed in the next village. They need a doctor. You need to get your things ready and go. You're going tomorrow. She said, that's okay. I'll get everything together and I'll just need to prepare my child and the things my child needs. And they said, you're not taking your child. You leave your child here in the village, you will go on your own. And she said, I don't want to leave my baby. She knew that she probably would never see me again. And they said, well, you don't have a say in it. You either go, do what we say, or we're going to kill you and your child. So she didn't know whether they were bluffing or not. So that night, she packed everything together that she could carry. One of them was her medicine bag. And she strapped me to her stomach and also put a plaster over my mouth. And she crawled in the opposite direction from where the village was and where the soldiers were going to come from, through the line of fire, because there was gunshots going on. Along the way, she healed whoever was wounded. It didn't matter if there was a wounded person, wounded soldier, she would help them as much as she could with the small bag that she had. And she came across a soldier who was badly wounded, dying actually, a German soldier, and she helped him as much as she could at that time. She knew he would die anyway. And he gave her a ticket to get on the train to go to Germany, which is what she did. We lived in Germany after that for 5 years. She knew some people in Wetzlar, which is where we lived in Germany, who had migrated to Australia, and she must have had some contact with them because they actually sponsored her. Getting off the train on North Terrace, and I had a little suitcase and my mother had her suitcase, and walking up North Terrace towards King William Street and thinking, this place doesn't look anything like Germany. And then some birds were singing, and I thought, well, the birds sound the same, so that's okay, it'll be all right. She didn't have any documentation to say that she was a doctor, and when she inquired about it, they said, well, you have to study for 6 years, you have to pay for that study, and you don't speak English. She had a little English, but very little. So with a child to look after, that was impossible. So she worked at the Royal Adelaide Hospital making teas, and she had a good sense of humour because she used to come home and say, I didn't know what they were talking about, the doctors, and they would order their morning tea, and I would come back with something completely different, just what I thought they'd said, and they were so nice, I used to just smile and say thank you.
Mum tried to be my dad too, because Dad would come and see me every second Sunday afternoon, and when he could. But there were many times where he couldn't because he was involved with his own church and building things and stuff like that. But I can remember her taking me from Unley, and we'd catch a bus to Morford Vale, which was then just a post office and a general store, and we'd go investigating, or we'd go to Noarlunga and go fishing in the Onkaparinga River, or we'd go to Port Noarlunga or Port Willunga. And I can remember her taking me to Victor Harbour on the Bluebird train and catching trains up to the National Park in Belair and going on picnics and going blackberry hunting. And she did all these sorts of things so that I had a bit of a boy's adventure as well as a stay-at-home thing. Mum's skin was pretty bad as a result of poor diet and very thin-skinned. And so when we would go blackberry picking, to get the best blackberries you had to go to the most dangerous parts. And she would come out and she'd be bleeding. And of course we caught a private bus there. And you know, she would be so worried about the blackberries. And she came out and I remember saying to her, "You're bleeding everywhere, Mum. It's okay as long as I don't get any on the blackberries." And then just crack up laughing.
The sad thing is that this educated woman had all this amazing knowledge and intelligence in her, was cleaning offices with people who could barely write their name, but because they were had a husband, both working, they were able to amass enough money to put a deposit on a house and get a car, and their lives were very comfortable.
See, the culture of the day was that males were dominant. In fact, as a single mum, she wasn't allowed to get any sort of government assistance. She wasn't allowed to open a bank account unless her husband signed as guarantor. She wasn't allowed to buy property. She wasn't allowed to purchase anything over a certain amount of money because the government laws were such that you couldn't, because they were all focused towards keeping women subservient to men.
We're very fortunate, both Peter and myself, to be where we are. But she was the springboard for all of that, not just by getting me out of Russia. That was certainly very, very important. And I can't think of a better place in the world to live than here. This is my home. But the struggle that she maintained afterwards and saw us through our years so that we can be here where we are now because of her. But she sacrificed her life for that. And that's the sadness. She didn't really have much sweetness or joy in her life at all.